Who doesn't love a good martial arts tale? But what if I told you that this story is about martial artists who were actually mushrooms? It sounds weird. It kind of is weird, but it's actually not bad. So we're going to talk about Fung Gi #1 from Scout Comics. See you in 3. And welcome back to Comical Opinions. This is our review of Fung Gi #1 from Scout Comics. And in this issue, we visit a world of sentient mushrooms and giant insects for a martial arts tale of honor and savagery. Before we get started, please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit that bell for notification. Your attention is greatly appreciated, and make sure to stay tuned through the end for the final score. Credits. Fung Gi #1 is written, drawn, colored, lettered, and cover art done all by one person, J.M. Renguet. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. It's either Renguet or Renguet. I'm not sure which, but there we go. What's the story about? In a nutshell, we visit feudal Japan, where a lone warrior and his overly chatty sidekick are on a quest to visit parts unknown for enlightenment and to make things right with the world. He encounters a fellow person who is captured by a bunch of slavers, and she's trying to make her way back to her clan, which has been attacked and overwhelmed by enemy forces. The warrior is convinced by his little chatty sidekick that he should help her out, even though she is not on his path to whatever goal he has in mind, which isn't exactly spelled out in the beginning. And he decides to intervene. They form a little group along with a much larger guy who's now in it for the money. He says, well, I'll help you guys too if you pay me off when I help you get to your destination and save your village. And thus leads the adventure where they travel through lands, climb many hills and mountains, through foggy ravines. They encounter thieves, mercenaries, and assassins. It's all the things that you would come to expect from a sort of feudal Japanese shogun, samurai, ninja type story, filled with lots of honor, brutality, martial arts action of the sword wielding kind, and tense moments, a little bit of levity, some bait and switches and some of the plot points, and just the overall stuff that you would come to expect from a story of that sort. How is this very, very different than anything you've ever encountered before? All the people are mushrooms in various forms and flavors, shapes, and sizes. They just basically they have the regular humanoid sort of bipedal body, but their heads take on the shapes of different forms of mushrooms, a fungus, if you will, hence the name fungi, which is a play, I guess a cute, clever play on words. J.M. Runget is also creating a more fantastical world in that it's not just people who are mushrooms. They also have insects that are incredibly large. The chatty little sidekick, whose name is Dochin, rides a beetle that's about the size of a small pony. Some of the warriors and the slavers, they will send messages to each other using not homing pigeons, but homing flies, I guess, with small very large insects about the size of a small bird that look like flies. And so you now have this weird eclectic mix of fantasy world that feels familiar in the type of genre and the type of storytelling that we're doing, given the characters, their names, their locations, and the kind of the opposing positive and negative forces they encounter. But at the same time, the fact that they're mushrooms is weird. It's strange. But it's sort of fantasy, but with a twist. Or I should say it's more like a standard samurai ninja type story, but with a fantasy twist. It's probably the better way to look at it. What do we like about Fung Gi #1? The concept is certainly original, at least in the setup and the scenario. The story feels very standard for what you would expect in a medieval or mid-ages type of Japanese feudal type of story with the lone warrior. It's very much a lone warrior story. He encounters allies and enemies along the way. It's very standard, or I should say very familiar in a good way. And then the fantasy twist, the fact that all the people are some form of mushroom, is very unique. I mean, I don't think anybody would have imagined that mashup prior to this. So there you go. And then the execution of the plot, there's a mystery that comes up where the woman that he rescues, Uriel Barrios, is who the warrior rescues, and her village is apparently being attacked, but it sounds like the attack is from somebody different than she anticipated, and then and all the people are gone when she finally gets to the bridge that leads to her village. So there's some mystery and there's some intrigue going on about who's attacking who and why, and is there some greater force working behind the scenes. So the mystery setup is good. The standard story with a fantasy twist is interesting, and the overall nature of the personalities and the characters involved are interesting. The lone warrior, his name is Basen Nata, is kind of a unique character, very stoic, and but also at the same time you want to know about his story because he is so reserved and quiet but deadly focused. So when the fights kick off, he's the guy to stand behind, and that proves true on more than one occasion. What didn't we like about the story? This is a little bit more difficult to quantify because this is not a problem that comes up too often. The dialogue is good, but it feels very stiff. It doesn't feel like people are talking with each other or to each other. It feels like the people are talking at each other. It's not in the grammar. It's not necessarily in the word choice, but it's in the delivery. It feels like people are saying lines. They're not acting. You're not getting the emotion. Now, part of the lack of the ability to perceive the emotion could be that the fact that they're mushrooms doesn't allow them to express their facial emotional reactions too well, because they are stiff, because their head is basically the head of a mushroom. So some of the facial cues that you would need to get them to express and react and act out with emotion is truncated, or at least constrained by a lot. So you're not getting much of the emotion out of the acting from the visuals, plus the dialogue, which feels sort of like people talking at each other instead of with each other. They're not interacting. They're sort of interacting just to give each other information, but if it doesn't feel like they're having a conversation. And so that's a little bit harder to quantify, but when you read it, it feels stiff. There's a stiffness to it that just kind of like doesn't really pull you into their interactions. And that's a bit of a bummer. It's correctable, but it's something that you notice pretty much right off the bat. What about the art? Well, so obviously you have to, if you're talking about samurai and ninjas and dark assassins and thieves and mercenaries that are mushrooms, you got to use some creativity. And to Ringwet's credit, he pulls it off. I mean, you could imagine this would be some kind of adaptation of an animated film or a movie with a pretty decent budget to get the special effects going. The character designs make sense for the world that it's been built. They move and act in a way that you could picture and perceive as, if you had to picture a sentient mushroom, what would that look like? Well, this is pretty much it. So from an art perspective, I think Ringwet nails it. Some of the scenes play a little flat. The characters don't move with a lot of dynamicism and energy. Could use a little bit more of that, but generally speaking, the art is solid. Final thoughts. What do we think about Fung Gi #1 from Scout Comics? Very interesting concept, very imaginative mashup, and the character designs and the art generally is good, and the mystery surrounding who's attacking Aurel Barrios' village, it's a fairly decent mystery there, and the progression of their journey is an intriguing one. However, the art action, I should say, is a little flat when it needs to be more fluid, and you need to see a little bit more energy. The facial acting really isn't there, so there's a repression of the expression of emotion, and the dialogue in concert with the lack of facial acting feels very stiff, and as though the characters are talking at each other instead of with each other. So there's a lack of chemistry in the dialogue. Therefore, we're going to give Fung Gi #1 a solid 7.5 out of 10. What do you think about mashups? How do you like fantasy mashups? Do you like taking your regular story, or at least a tried and true story, and putting a fantasy twist on it? What are your favorites? Do you have a favorite? Let us know in the comments down below. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining. Please stay tuned through the outro for more reviews just like this one.